In 1513, the renowned 16th century Italian politician and diplomat Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a book entitled The Prince, which was interpreted as an endorsement of the dark arts of cunning and deceit in diplomacy. The book was aimed at providing advice to princes. Machiavelli said virtue and riches seldom settle on one man. My guest today is author and also another Italian, Mr. Angelo Agrizzi, the former Chief Operating Officer of Bosasa, a company that became deeply embedded in the state capture of the South African government. And Angelo became one of South Africa's most well-known whistleblowers. In this interview, we are not going to focus on his testimony at the Zondo Commission on state capture, but rather our aim is to spotlight a cult culture that formed around a Machiavellian personality in the company. Angelo, in your book, Inside the Belly of the Beast, you say, it is important that one never confuses a cult with a corporate culture. Yet you say Bosasa was a cult, and in a cult there was also a master, a kingpin, and you identify Gavin Watson, the former CEO, as a cult-like leader. Machiavelli served him well, you say in the book.
That's correct. Good afternoon, Mickey, and to your people that are listening on your podcast. I must say I'm very impressed with your podcast, and they've really captured my mind as well. Yes, it's true. Bosasa was a cult. It was. It was an entity, and that's why I said Machiavelli served him well. Gavin Watson was a cult master. You know, in a cult in Bosasa, there was a strong need for acceptance. People wanted to believe that their lives, or they believed that their lives were totally dependent on Gavin Watson and the master being the person who wrote out their checks every month. They believed that without him, they were absolutely nothing. And I'm talking from the directors right the way through to the people working on the ground. They honestly believed that he controlled their future, and they looked to him for favor. And so for many years, I also found myself in the same trap. You know, every single member of the Bosasa cult was at some time privy to the manipulation that took place and the deep embedded intimidation. You know, it would be no skin off his back to embrace, or to not to embrace, but to take a person under his wing, and at the same time throw the person under the bus, embarrass the person in front of everybody else. Total disrespect for the person. He would shame them. He'd turn around. I remember one incident. He said, "Don't cry, Gina. Stand up, Jacques." Belittling commands. The same derogatory people he was at one time blessing and esteeming, he was now running them down. And that's why people just seem to become more and more involved with serving this master that was out there.
You state that the culture started out to be very well intended, based upon each person's God-given talents, and that the day the Bosasa commenced with prayer meetings. Now, Machiavelli stated, a man who strives after goodness in all his acts is sure to come to ruin, since there are so many men who are not good, and since there are many possible qualities that a prince can said to possess, he must not be overly concerned about having all the good ones. Also, a prince may be perceived to be merciful, faithful, humane, frank, and religious. But most important, it only seemed to have these qualities. So what happened at these seemingly religious prayer meetings?
You know, initially it started off, it seemed to be very good. There was maybe 4 or 5 of us that would get together, we'd share the word, and people would you know, kind of say their prayers and that. But later on, it started becoming Gavin's tool to getting to understand where people were at. He wanted people to pray out loud so he could hear where they were at and what their motives were. Why were they at the prayer meetings? What were they doing at the company? He wouldn't allow people just to sit there and keep quiet. He'd want them to either share word from the Bible, and he would then use that, you know, to gather his so-called intelligence. You know, the accusations that would come out. People would come there with agendas. There was one specific lady who would come there and would dream of snakes outside the boardroom, and they would come in different colors, and she would explain that these snakes had blue and yellow coloring on their bodies. And the next time somebody walked in the office and they had blue and yellow on, they immediately identified them as a snake and a serpent from hell. But not only that, it was the premonitions that took place as well, the exorcisms in the boardroom. Prayers really became witch hunts. It was taking a turn back in Salem, where if a person's name was mentioned in a prayer meeting, Watson wanted them dismissed immediately. The very next day, I can't tell you how many people I actually saved from the slaughter by actually just transferring them out to other operational units outside the company premises so that they wouldn't be seen by Watson. There were even incidents where I swapped the person's first name and his surname around on the payroll so that they could still keep their job and that Watson didn't know where they were. So, so it was quite interesting. The one I can think of is Carlos Bonifacio became Bonnie Carlos, he was one of them. And another one was Conseil, Jacques Conseil, which I had to put out to pasture. And I ended up smuggling to another operational unit and giving him a second name. So he became Jacques Rian Conseil, so that nobody would identify with him as the person that Gavin Watson wanted, or at that stage it was Lindy Gross, wanted dismissed. And I mean, it was just interesting how people could be lifted up and made heroes the one day, and then the very next day be fired and actually be crucified. And this was the tendency we had to face every day. We had to manage that. I think the biggest problem, the biggest issue I had in working there was actually managing people and becoming the buffer between the people and Watson, where he tried to dismiss them and I'm trying to protect them and trying to, keep them safe. So yes, that is one of the despondent things that happened while I was there.
So talking about crucifixions, I mean, the emperors of Rome were once considered the most important and powerful men on the earth, and they were deified.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just enough to rule the world or the empire, they had to become gods. And people prostrate themselves before gods, and they carry the favor of the gods. And they make sacrifices to gods, as you said. So in antiquity, people were dependent upon the favors of the gods. So have the working classes become dependent upon masters? And then did this happen in Bosasa?
With validation that they required. If they didn't get the validation, they didn't get the increases. If they didn't get the increases, they were put under more pressure. They were put on different duties. So they had their tasks taken away from them, given to others. Small little things like that upset them and drove a kind of a wedge between them and the people. The biggest issue we had there was that Gavin Watson, if you read the book, I refer to Stalin's chicken, where he actually takes this chicken and he plucks it. He literally plucks this chicken until it's bleeding. Now, whether it's just a legacy, it's a story, or whether it's true is beside the point. You can imagine yourself, there's Stalin sitting in front of all his top generals with his chicken under his armpit and pulling out every single feather so that it's bleeding, but eventually gives the chicken a little bit of seed and food, and the chicken kind of recognizes him as his provider, and he keeps giving a little bit of seed, and he plucks some more feathers out. But the chicken is not worried about his feathers being plucked. That he's worried about where he's getting his food from, and that's what was happening to a lot of people in Bosasa. They would be told openly, "Listen, I'll pay your salary, and you will do A, B, and C." If there was a visit over the weekend, God forbid if somebody wasn't at their work, at their place on a Sunday morning. I remember how many times we had people coming, asking me, "Please, can they have Sunday off? It's their child's christening, or it's their grandchild's birthday, or something like that." How many people were actually too scared to go to these functions, family functions, because if they're not at the office, the following week would become hell for them. So, these were all little Stalin chickens running around Bosasa. That's how they were treated.
You also told me that you had an answer for him if he would call you 2:00 in the morning and ask you.
Yeah, it was quite funny. One morning he phoned me, it must have been about 2:15 in the morning. I just happened to be awake. 2:15, he phoned me and I picked up the phone and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said to him, I'm waiting for your call, Gavin. didn't know what to say to me. So I think I was the one person who could manage his let's not call it his ego, but his cult ways. I could manage that. I could actually put him in his place in a nice way.
Now, master manipulators also control people by rewarding their good behavior, as you said, and they punish their bad behavior. So this also happens in abusive domestic relationships.
Correct.
But at some time, you also said you yourself fell victim to the manipulation, due to a fragile ego. Now, Machiavelli said, if a prince is overly generous to his subjects, he will not be appreciated and will only cause greed for more. So did this become true for you too?
No, of course it did. I'll never deny it. It became very true. I mean, I would also fall under this Machiavellian curse, this kind of web that he had spun for us. So, it most definitely happened to myself. I will never deny it. He was able to manipulate me, entice me, the nice cars, the nice house, the nice clothes, all that type of thing. So yes, one does become involved and one actually becomes motivated by that. So that's unfortunately, death trap, so to speak.
What would your warning be to somebody who suspects that they are in a cult corporate environment?
My warning would be to get out as soon as possible. And remember something, Mickey, that Machiavellian doesn't just let you go. All right. If he lets you go, chances are that he wants to let you go. Number one. Number two is he lets you go only because it serves his purpose. One thing you've got to be very careful of is once you decide to make the break, you've got to go for good. And I think that was where my fault came in. I made the initial break in the July 2016, but I was enticed back. So what happens is they come around and they then entice you back with glorious offers, shareholding, absolutely all the things you could think of. They acknowledge that they were wrong in the past and they want to change, and they'll do absolutely anything and promise absolutely anything to get you back into the fray of things. So in my case, it was literally 2 weeks out of the company, and they applied absolutely every single bit of pressure, including using friends, family, to come and see me, to speak to me, and to try and entice me back. And that's exactly where they get the better part of you. And one needs to guide you. One needs to be very careful in a cult environment that if you decide to walk, you walk for good. You never ever turn back.
Angelo, this has been a very insightful interview. It's the first of a few that I hope we're going to have in the future. And thank you very much for participating. And I'd like to tell everybody that Angelo wrote 2 books. The first one is Inside the Belly of the Beast, and the second one is Surviving the Beast. I highly recommend both of these books. It's really captivating reading. Now, if you're more interested in a Machiavellian leader, then please subscribe to my Patreon channel for a full interview with Angelo Agrizzi. Angelo, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dottore.
Ciao.